It's a podcast. You're listening to Gorehead and the Wiener.
So this podcast is something I wish existed for my own sake when I started trying to watch horror movies. I have an uncomfortable combination of both being fascinated with horror content and being repulsed by certain types of gore. This podcast is going to follow my journey into the endless abyss of horror movies with Chris as my horror guide.
I will be your Sherpa
along
this rocky road of gore.
You're going to be paddling me through an endless river of bloody gore. So that's what this podcast is. It's just exploring different horror movies and upping my tolerance to gore because it's starting out not very good. So if you ever have the desire to watch horror movies without being too grossed out, could follow along and see if these movies will work for you, because we're going to go over a bunch of them.
Give you hopefully a roadmap to progress and callous up your brain to enjoy more and more shocking gore.
Yeah, because there's so much of horror that is really fun to watch for me, and it's like the creepy aspects of it is really fascinating, and some of the psychological messed upness is fun to watch. But often those movies are paired with some gore that I can't watch, so it's kind of unfortunate that I can't enjoy those movies, you know? So
I'll also say right now that I am also a bit of a snooty gorist in the sense that I have like a tolerance level for just gore for no reason, and I think that is just lazy and tasteless. So hopefully I'm not gonna try to trick you into watching some movie that'll just be gory for the sake of gore. I want my gore to be interwoven into the story, because that's way more effective also. It actually does help when the gore makes sense and it's not just gore for the sake of showing something disgusting to gross out your sister. It's like the adult version of squishing gack in your little sister's face.
I will admit, I've never been super interested in slasher movies, just because the story doesn't engage me a ton. So, and I think a lot of those movies is from the 80s, that type of gore I could probably handle, but I'm not inspired to watch it, whereas some of the stuff like The Thing has been on my list for a super long time, because I'm just fascinated by the story of it and also the practical effects side of it. But
yeah, it's a very famous gory horror movie.
Yeah, but anyways, let's get into it. So the first movie that you decided to subject me to was Color Out of Space.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So why did you choose that one for me?
Well, I'm a big fan of Lovecraftian horror and eldritch horror. Yes, as you can see from our beautiful prop of my anthology of all Lovecraft stories
on the YouTube video, if you're just listening.
That's true. You can imagine a large book covered in tentacles with Cthulhu on the front.
Oh yeah.
Ironically, I have only read one story involving Cthulhu, but that's digressing. But it's not all about Cthulhu, and even though this is a Lovecraft story, Cthulhu did not show up. This is about a meteorite falling from space, but yeah, whatever. Okay, I have to get back to the main point here.
Why did you choose this for me?
I chose this for you because, well, first you kind of for you, I just wanted to figure out what you know, because everyone's like freaked out by different types of gore. So I think the best way to specialize it for anybody is to figure out what freaks you out the most and avoid that first, because you don't want to just jump head first into the deep end and then get so freaked out that you'll never want to watch another movie again, because that's that's like the problem with like tricking your friend into watching something terrifying is it happens once and then they'll never trust you again.
Exactly.
So I figured out that for you specifically, you are more, you don't like the very intense, realistic, close, tight up gore, where it really feels that it could like happen to you, and it looks very painful, and you can imagine that pain.
Exactly.
Which is very understandable. I think that's for me. It's definitely the same. Like I can look at any dude's face getting ripped in half, but if you show me someone's like ankle dislocating sideways, I want to barf my brains out. Like
yes, and I think it's just the unknown of watching a horror movie and just not knowing like what's gonna show up, and that's
the fun if you don't mind.
It's the fun. If once I get over that, then it'll be kind of entertaining. But
the fear of the unknown, you could say.
The fear of the unknown. But yeah, I would say it was a good choice because it had a lot of the movie that didn't have any gore at all, and it had Nicolas Cage in it, which is just always delightful.
It always dulls the horror just a slight bit whenever you see that it's Nicolas Cage, because he's so hard. You can't unassociate Nicolas Cage with the movie. He doesn't morph into the movie.
He is himself. He doesn't. He plays a character until he plays himself in the movie, because he'll be the character that he's cast for, and then he just goes berserk, and then he is himself. He's like full on Nick Cage.
Goofy voices, talking about llama's milk.
Yeah, so I guess now we should probably get into the premise of the movie before we get any further. So I'll try to describe it, and you could kind of correct me if I'm wrong. You've read the book, but you've said it was a little bit different.
A lot different.
Okay, so
a lot different. Let me tell you, after rereading the story, because I read the story like many years ago now, and so when I was rereading the story, I had the movie fresh in my mind. So I was really trying to read it knowing the plot of the movie and just seeing how close they got it.
Yeah.
Because I knew that the biggest departure right away is that the movie is set in present day and the book is obviously written from the early 1900s. So this takes place in like the late 1700s. Okay. So when they're talking about, back in 82, that ain't 1982, that's 1882. Yeah, they ain't rocking hammer pants. They're rocking horse and carriage, yo.
Okay, we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But so for the movie, from what I gathered, like, it starts out it has no, what's the word? It doesn't influence the rest of the story in any way. That basically this girl is like a Wiccan, and she's like at this river, and I think
Wiccan stuff.
Probably the reason for that to happen is because it introduces this guy that's testing the water in the area. So he comes over, introduces himself, and you kind of get the idea that he's into her. So it kind of creates a reason for him to be in the story, basically.
Yeah, the connection. Yeah.
But the general premise is that there's this family. Nicolas Cage is the dad. There's the mom there, and they have 2 sons and a daughter. And one day, this asteroid just lands in their backyard, and it's super out of nowhere. This asteroid is like bright purple. They bring in the police and the other
news reporters come in,
and
the scientist guy comes and tries to bring other people.
The hydro dude, he comes, and they're all investigating this, and they're realizing that this asteroid is actually sort of disintegrating day after day until it's just completely gone. And they're like, well, what the hell? What's going on with that? And basically, as time progresses, you're realizing that there is some fucked up shit that was in that asteroid, and it's basically making this family go a little bit insane. And a lot of what happens in the movie it's like them trying to show like an alien life force that we can't see with our naked eye, and it's creating a brand new color in their vision that humans have never seen before, and the way that they've sort of depicted this color is with neon purple, which is kind of
purpley pink
ongoing color in horror movies.
That is like the go-to Lovecraftian color, actually, because there's this other Lovecraft movie based off of one of his short stories called From Beyond.
Yeah.
And in the 80s version of that, when they flip on this crazy machine that allows them to see interdimensional monsters, everything is purple and pink. So
Lovely.
I think that the director definitely, or whoever decided to choose the colors, was influenced from
that makes
Beyond.
sense. And it also seems like purple and pink is it's a color that doesn't necessarily show up too much naturally.
No.
Apart from like sunsets.
Yeah, it kind of gives you like this weird, like dream-like, ethereal.
Yes, it makes sense because the colors elsewhere are just kind of dull. So this bright color adds that contrast. But so this family is basically just slowly going insane and kind of becoming possessed by this color.
They hear voices that aren't there. The kid's like whispering to the well. He thinks that someone lives in the well, and like. And
the llamas, they have there's like a farm kind of deal there. They have llamas, and they just one day are all conjoined together in like this big undulating mass.
Yeah, well, the meteorite specifically, when it gets near like kind of the middle to the third act portion, that's when it really starts going nuts, and it kind of merge DNA of different things together, and it seems like it's just trying to kind of create like this uniform like world or life form that's just kind of made up of everything collectively. And so it seems that the major thing that it does in the movie is just fuse stuff together. And so, it fuses all the lavas together, and the dog's kind of in there, like sticking out the side, kind of like a little Thing reference. And then the mom and the kid get blasted with the evil space beams and gets merged into a puddle of ugh.
But basically, that's the premise. And I don't even know at the end of the movie there's not necessarily a moral. It's just kind of this
and that's
whole family is just completely obliterated basically by this thing.
Well, and that's kind of like that is kind of, if you want a moral to take away from pretty much every Lovecraft story, is to be afraid of the unknown. Mm-hmm. There are horrifying things out there that are beyond our comprehension, and even if we think we have control of science and understanding of our world, there could be things out there that, are beyond our comprehension, and there's no way that we could possibly understand them because they are not of our world.
Yeah.
And so something super foreign is unimaginable and undescribable, and that's why everyone goes nuts.
Exactly.
And so it's pretty much there's cautionary tales to be afraid of things.
That makes sense. Yeah. That kind of sums it up, and a lot of because it doesn't necessarily explicitly tell you what this alien thing is doing, but a lot of what it reminds me of is Annihilation.
Yes, that movie I feel
is the closest maybe to
I
story.
really want to know like the timeline of when Annihilation came out and when The Color Out of Space came out, because I'm pretty sure I saw Annihilation first, and when I was watching Color Out of Space, when I watched Color Out of Space, it felt very much the same, because it was like in Annihilation, it's a rainbow bubble that just starts to fuse everything together.
That's something where I actually read the books for that, and they go into more depth as to the reasoning behind all the stuff that's happening, or what the biologist thinks is happening. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of just this alien trying to kind of recreate things based on their own history, and it's not necessarily malevolent. But it's just creating things, trying to kind of mimic human life and the things it's coming across. And that kind of made me wonder with Color Out of Space if maybe it was a similar thing, where it's just like trying to recreate things it knows, but based off of human life contact. It's like creating a super fucked up version of it.
Yeah, it can't
mimicking.
It doesn't, like, whatever humans are made up of isn't really copacetic with whatever it's made out of, and it unfortunately just turns us into horrible monsters that can't function right.
But it never explicitly says any of that, but it was just kind of interesting because it leaves it a little bit open.
Yeah, there was just one moment Actually,
it shows the alien
the
planet,
world,
right?
and there's a little explanation by Chong from Cheech and Chong when he's glowing and fused to the floor, and he's talking through the radio, and he's saying how it's like it's trying to turn our world into its and what it knows, and that is actually directly from the book.
Okay, perfect.
That is specific, actually, but it's read by the father and not that dude.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so that makes sense. That's kind of why probably also reminded me of Annihilation a lot.
I'd be really curious, actually, if there was a really bizarre, kind of like connective circle where the author of the book of Annihilation was inspired by Lovecraft, and ironically, the guy who made the Lovecraft movie was inspired by the Annihilation movie, and so they're both reversed.
That would be awesome, because there's a lot of parallels. Like, it is very Lovecraftian, that movie.
And it's very Lovecraftian, but it's funny because the Color Out of Space movie feels more like a copy of Annihilation than an actual more copy of the original Color Out of Space book, because a lot of stuff that happens in the movie does not happen in the book, and even how the area is transformed is very different, and it ends the same, where there's a comet that shoots into space, but it happens vastly differently and very, very slowly.
Cool.
Because the book, actually being only like 26 pages, takes the place over the course of an entire year.
Yeah.
And so you see the entire like seasonal change of what the meteorite does to the area.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so it's like interesting to see how it's actually way different, because it doesn't create any llama monsters, and obviously it takes place way older, so it's like there's just cows and horses and all the animals. It describes it better in the sense that it's draining everything around it, because actually in the book, it's like everything turns bright color, grows really big, and then the next season, everything actually grows way tinier, and all the color's gone out of everything, and everything turns gray and starts to crumble into dust.
Yeah.
And so the animals start crumbling, but then the family starts crumbling, and like the book ends with his farm neighbor coming into his house and talking to the husband. That's when he talks about how it came from space and it's changing everything. And he crumbles in front of him, like decays. And like they say, like the cows form these weird gray spots on their body, and like they collapse in on themselves in weird ways. And like it could have been like. That's why it's kind of like I almost felt a little sad reading the books. Like, the movie actually probably does not capitalize on a lot of like the things that are in the book. Where it's like if they actually showed that stuff, I think it would be a lot scarier. Just because.
That's unfortunate.
Well, and there's also a lot more in the beginning of like the scientists coming and researching it, because they actually take samples of the meteorite back and they go to a university and they study it and they talk about it, how it's like immune to everything essentially, but it never stops being hot. And it as it disappears, it takes whatever it's touching with it. So like they leave it in a beaker overnight, and then when they come back, the beaker and it are gone. And there's just a little burn mark on the table. They're like, where did it go?
I kind of want to read this now, because that sounds. Would you say if they took more from if they made it closer to the story in the book, would it have been a better movie, or do you think maybe it was just too much stuff to fit into one movie?
Yeah, well, I think part of it was definitely, I was wondering, like, just budgetary constraints, because the whole movie
it's a low-budget movie.
Yeah, it's low budget. It's all filmed at the farm in, like, one location. And in the story, they're going to different farms. Like, the town is involved in it. Like, they interact with the town a lot more, because they talk about how slowly the family pulls away, and they don't. The mom and the kid don't fuse into a horrible monster. They both go insane, and it's, I think, scarier because they're both locked in separate rooms from each other. But it's the middle child, who's a boy, and he's 15, and he goes nuts instead of the little baby kid.
Yeah,
and they're both in rooms across from each other in the attic, apparently screaming at each other in like what the littlest kid thinks is like some alien language, and because it kind of seems like they're talking to each other, but it's just screaming. And like they say, like the wife slowly like started walking on all fours, and like she so as she degrades, she turns into more and more of a creature, and her skin starts glowing the color at night, and then she's described at the end as, because the neighbor actually, who's Chong, is the main character of it.
Oh.
Because he lives through the whole thing. And the scientist guy who's in the movie, he's barely in it. Because he actually isn't even present for any of the events. He comes afterwards to test the water, to actually put a water reservoir in there. So they kind of like mush those two timelines together in the book, or in the movie.
Yeah.
And he essentially listens to Chong in the story version, and he quits. The next day, he's like, fuck this. Yeah. I'm out. I want to be a part of this. I don't want to go, because he walks by the well once, and this takes place 25 years after the events of what happens on the farm. And then the story goes into just describing the events of the farm. And so, but the ending is a lot more creepy and talks a bit more about the alien still being there, because they say like every year the forest graze 1 inch, but it's going slower now. And the scientist actually believes that it's the neighbor, because he was the last one to be exposed to the meteorites. He went into the house to check on the family, and he's like the anchor that keeps the space color there, and he's like the center of it, essentially, and he's spreading the rot through the rest of the world. And yeah, so it's like, oh, it's a little more ominous.
That's really cool. That makes me, I mean, they made it into a Nicolas Cage movie.
Well, and also the father, who's played by Nicolas Cage in the movie, is like just this totally normal kind of hillbilly dude, doesn't freak out once. And so it's like, Nicolas Cage may not have been like, but I see why they cast him, because he was just in Mandy, and it probably is the reason why people watched it, is because Nicolas Cage is in it.
100%. I don't think it would have done as well without him.
No, there's no way, because he is definitely the biggest name in it. There's no other famous person in it other than him.
It's funny, because it was on its own a pretty decent movie. Didn't blow my mind, but it was decent. Like, a lot of the fun part about it was Nicolas Cage, obviously.
Yes.
But yeah, there were some cool parts in there, but hearing the story from the book makes me kind of wish that it was a little bit more closer to that. But
yeah, it's interesting, because Nicolas Cage is definitely the reason why I was there, but it was unfortunate that he also suffered from him being in it, because you could tell there's certain points, because they do mention in the book, like, oh, the fruit's really big, because he grows other fruit other than tomatoes, because he has like a full-ass farm. Because he also talks about like the logistics. He's like, okay, so all the shit around the well is poisonous. I still have 10 acres above my house, so he moves all of his animals up there. He moves, and the fruit up there can grow fine for a while. And then over the course of the next season, even though the animals never drank from the well or ate any of the fruit, they still were getting sick. And so the scientists are never able to connect how the animals were getting sick, but then how the family got sick. So the family was drinking the water, and they actually drained the well, because in the climax of the book, there's like a posse that goes out to the farmhouse. There's like 6 cops and like 2 or 3 scientists and the neighbor. And he's like, they write it, he's like, I'm really glad there's other people with me. I didn't really want to go back there by myself. And they go up there and they drain the well, and at the bottom is just like this goopy mass. They poke it with like this rod, and it just keeps going on and on. And then after that, it like gets disturbed and essentially starts to like glow. And like and it's cool, because that's how I wish they portrayed it in the movie, and I don't know how easy it would have been, but they describe how the glow, because in the movie you could tell they're just blasting really big purple lights everywhere, and there's like a purple filter over everything. Everything's just really purple. But in the story of the book, everything is like saturated with it. So it's not like the sky is glowing, it's everything is glowing. So they say like the house is glowing because it's seeped into the wood of the house, because it's sit there for so long. And it's like the grass is glowing, and like all the trees are glowing, and everything has a glow. If you like, because they describe at one point, one of the farmers who lives really far away from him saw like the whole area was glowing. And so that's why people stopped going towards their house, because they thought they were cursed or something. And so it's like,
kind of were.
Well, they were cursed by a horrible, weird, glowing monster apparently that lives in the fucking ground. Well, because they say at one point, it's really weird, because like there's like the scientists, they come back for a second sample and they take a giant chunk out of it apparently, and they describe it where it's like it's just really brittle but also feels like flesh, and so it's like ripping it out rather than cutting it out with the hammer. Yeah, and like inside of it there's like this softer glow in it, and there's like a bubble that forms, and they pop it, and when they pop it, whatever the bubble is touching makes it the ground disappear with it. So when it disappears, whatever it's touching, so it creates this little pocket of nothingness because it disappears all the dirt that was around it. It's like really bizarre. So like anytime a piece of it disappears, it takes whatever it's touching with it.
Well, that's not good.
So it's like, well, they kind of like in the book think that it's like essentially powering up its spaceship to return, and that's portrayed between the movie pretty well as the same, but it's just how it's actually just like consuming them all. It's not portrayed very well because in the book they all die the same way. It's not like, oh, they were turned into a goop monster and then that kid fell in the well. Yeah. And so it's actually the bigger adults, they decayed slowly and died slower, and all his kids died faster, and they actually were lured into the well. And when they take all the water out, there's like all of his kids' corpses are in the well. There's a deer, like, and all the other little animals. So it's been feeding on things and pulling them in, because they talk about how it's like, it's there, but you can't leave. It keeps you there. And so that's what I wish they portrayed a lot better in the movie, is the pull of it, that they want to leave, but they can't.
Yeah, this makes me want a better movie. This makes me want me.
That's why the book is always better than the movie.
I want to do this myself.
Right.
But yeah, so that's really interesting talking about the book. But I guess the next step is probably talk about the gore aspect of it. So as a general overview of the gore, there was mostly a lot of the practical effects.
Yes, yeah, a lot.
It just basically when characters fuse together and they turn into like a really gloopy.
Yeah, it's like CG. Like, if you're not familiar with like the difference between like practical effects and like computer generated effects, those are the two versions, and the difference is you use actual like plastics and like molds of people's heads, and you form a real thing that goes over somebody, or it's like a giant puppet. Essentially is what most practical effects are, and that's a lot easier for, well, not like monster practical effects, because you just can't really make like a realistic robot that's going to move like a person. Maybe one day practical effects with those Boston Dynamics robots. But maybe one day robotics could be good enough to make it believable. But right now it's like anytime you see a monster, it moves pretty janky, and like you have to shoot it a certain way. So because it's usually like a big mass, because there's a bunch of like robotics inside of it. Like it's like a really complicated like Muppet essentially. Yeah. And so those movies are always a lot easier to introduce heavy gore with, because your brain can kind of switch that, disassociate what you're seeing from reality. It's like,
it is a little bit easier.
You don't see a lot of like goopy llama monsters in your day-to-day life. And I think there was some CG in this movie, but because it was such a low budget movie, the CG wasn't great. And having both of us coming from like a animation background, we can probably pick up on that a little bit better. But snooty.
So I would say, and the type of gore as well, there's like one scene where the lady chopped her finger off, so that was a little bit more of a realistic thing, and then the rest of it seemed to be very abstract gore, like the one scene where the llamas are completely just, like I was saying before, they're all entangled together, and it's like similar to The Thing, where the heads are all like, it just looked like the weird dog monster from The Thing. It was all llamas.
That's definitely what they were going for. Which
and it was for people who are I don't know how to like place this, but if you are more afraid of really realistic gore, I think this movie would be okay, because most of it you could tell it's a puppet, like the like big moments where you see people getting fused together and stuff. because it'll just cut to them as the thing, as like not the thing, as like the weird
new creation,
like,
whatever
weird
it
mushed
is.
together version of whatever they are. And with the llamas, you could tell there was like their heads were all puppets and they couldn't really move that, like they were very limited. Like they just kind of like you'd see the head of the llama and they're just kind of like flopping a little bit, and they put goop on them so they're slimy, and that was the gist of it. A lot of the grossest part of those moments is the sounds that they make. It was a lot of gurgling.
The audio, I think, was really good. That's what sold it well.
So if you keep that in mind while watching those scenes, I don't think you'll be scared. It just kind of like adds to the feeling of the movie more than like being really disgusting and like horrifying.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of gross, but not in a way that would scare you, I don't think.
No. There's like, just the part where the mom's cutting carrots and chops her fingers off is
that's
like,
the most realistic thing.
And there's one, and then one scene where the young daughter is going nuts near the end, and she starts carving symbols into her body, but it's barely in the movie. I think that's like a 15-second scene where she's doing like we actually see her doing it.
Hard to watch a little bit, but it's not like someone cutting off their own limb or something. Like
no,
terrifying like that. And then I think they did the effect of the son and the wife being fused together really well, because it starts with them a little bit more realistic, kind of not realistic, but you can see
it's hidden. It's hidden a lot more. They do it really clever in the sense they put a blanket over them, so it's just this very unhuman mass underneath the blanket. So you can, it freaks you out because your mind, it's like that's not a person under there, and you see just like the slightest bit of like her shoulder and her face.
That's it. You barely ever see the sun. And
you see him afterwards because his face is glued to her back.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. They get more and more into like this weird ball form but it's clearly like a puppet type of a thing. And,
but they do a good job on that because it has limited motion. It's just on a couch, and they put a lot of slime on it.
They put a lot of slime on it, and the worst part of it is the sounds, because that is the part. Like if you turn the audio off, you wouldn't be scared of it at all.
Yeah.
It's more just because you can hear their like the pain that they're in.
Yeah, and it's like it's a small child screaming and a mom screaming, and it's their
like just that. The thought of that, it's more like the thought of it, because they do a really good job at hiding all of like the weaknesses of that puppet, because they put a blanket on it and they have it lit in a way where it's only showing like the good parts of it, and they show very minimal movement, really good sound design. That's the sound design is the grossest part of it. And then when they move them up to the attic, that's when they start getting a little bit more gross, but that's when there's also like
when they just toss her on a weird, dirty, hobo-stained mattress that they had.
But there's like one scene near the end where the mom and the son combo, they like try to attack the daughter, and it like sprouts these spider legs and just go
and it just yells her name at her.
Yeah, and it's like it looks like it's gonna eat her, but it just stands there, and the daughter's screaming, and it just stands there. It's like
that doesn't do a good job of translating, because it's like I think that they're trying to go for that, like she's trying to fuse the daughter into her new body, but like
they didn't come across that.
Yeah, because it's just like she says something vague about being with her or something,
right?
But it doesn't really
join us.
Yeah, she just gets covered in some slime, and that's the worst that happens to her.
And that part is the CG part that is not great, and it's a lot of it looks like it's in shadow, because it doesn't seem like the CG was done.
Well, it's shot from above too, so you just kind of see like the top silhouette of it, and it has like this really long, goofy neck, which kind of like, and its face is just kind of on the end. And when you see the close up of its face, it's like
definitely a lot of things.
It's got a bit of a mummy mouth going on.
Yeah, it's a lot.
When the mummy blasts, whether the mummy's mouth goes super long and like blasts bees out of it.
Yes. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. You shoot dogs with bees in your mouth.
But yeah, that's the gore of the movie, and I would say like
Nicolas Cage murders a shitload of tomatoes in that movie.
Oh, those poor tomatoes. They didn't taste very good. He's mad
They
about
were
that.
awful.
I would say, seeing as I'm the one that's bad with gore, my favorite and least favorite gore. So I actually really liked how they did the melded humans together, because I think it was just very... They did it in a smart way. It was just when it gets up to the attic and it goes into the CG part that I was like, oh, okay, that was not necessary. You could have done something else, probably. Or shot it in a way that was more terrifying. Because usually whenever you show an entire creature and you don't have the ability to do it, it takes everything out of the moment.
Yeah.
If you think back to the older horror movies where they hide a lot and it's just shadows, like they probably could have done it better with just showing shadows and then cutting to close-ups or something.
Yeah, well, like there's tons of great examples, but I would say even probably one of the best, just looking at puppets, not really a scary movie, but Aliens is like the scene when they first go into the alien nest and like all the aliens are on the walls and it's like dark and you don't really see them. They look awesome and spooky, but then at the end of the movie, all the aliens start attacking them in that red room and they're just kind of leaping through the air and they look just kind of like a puppet going through there, like, and so, but then it like cuts to them in the attic or in the venting and they look super cool because they're all together and they don't look like puppets.
Yeah.
But then, there's always moments where it's just like, oh yeah, that's a puppet.
There's always moments. And like, I'll cut them some slack because it was definitely a low budget movie. So it makes sense. But yeah, I would say like when they first meld together, that combined with like the lighting and the audio, I think that was done the best. It was very uncomfortable to watch, but I wasn't scared.
Yeah.
And then my least favorite part, as you know, is like when they cut the finger off, because I couldn't even watch that. Like I closed my eyes during that part where they cut the finger off because she's chopping carrots and it keeps like this was done really well where she's cutting carrots and it's a close up of her cutting the carrot with her finger right there and it cuts to her face and she's clearly not paying attention, cuts back and she cuts her finger off and it's just like it's exactly what you don't want to happen and they do it in the perfect way where it's it's happening.
Well, and you might have missed the next part because you're
and she's
turning in terror. Well, because she just puts up her hands like dinner's ready, and so she doesn't even register that she's chopped her fingers off.
Yes.
Like she just is in like her own little world.
Yeah. So that was my least favorite part because that grossed me out a lot. But yeah, I would say as like the Gore Wiener rating. I should explain what that means. Gore Wiener rating. Like if you're like a bit of a wiener for gore, this rating is for you. So
what's the rating? The limit of it?
Out of 10.
Okay.
So gory wiener rating. I'll give this, and like the higher the number is, the more tolerable it is. Lower the number is like it's going to be hard for you to watch it as a gory wiener.
Never get tired of you saying that.
Gory wiener. It's going to be 8 out of 10 gory wiener.
You know what? I think that's pretty doable.
It's doable. I would say if you have a similar idea of or a similar fear of gore, you can watch this movie. It's not too bad. It will definitely have moments where I think it will scare you, but I think you can watch it.
Unless you are somebody who doesn't mind any gore but is afraid that you're going to get abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
Then don't watch the movie because it'll freak the fuck out of you.
There are people like that
right?
Only alien things.
There's dudes that live in like campers in the woods and that they're just looking for UFOs all day. I bet that is like a documentary to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, like, I think I've given tips throughout this thing. I mean, the worst part of it is the audio for those moments. So if it is scaring you, just turn the audio down.
Well, yes. and also I'd say that it definitely helped you knowing like the synopsis of the movie before going in, so you were like aware that a lady chopped her fingers off, and so
exactly.
You know it's okay to spoil the movie for yourself if it's
especially if you're trying to get into watching more horror. I think just me knowing what's happening until I can get to the point where I've seen the gore and I can get it, I can watch it. for myself, I always read the synopsis and like I have an idea of what's going on. Because I had seen portions of this movie before I had even seen it with Chris, so I hadn't finished it before. So that's why I knew about the finger chopping scene. But
it's funny that you had actually seen the grossest part and the part that you hated the most before you even watched the movie.
I had actually watched it.
Yeah.
I want to watch it again. But yeah, it's very doable. So yeah, that's my rating for it. Color Out of Space.
All right, podcast's over.